Hey guys, Chris from Provo Beast Audio Installation, and in today's video we're doing an amplifier and subwoofer install in this 2020 Toyota Tacoma. Now in this install we're going to show you how to integrate this amp and sub to the factory audio sound system. Let's get started. Now, one quick thing to note before we jump to the bench to show you the parts that we're going to need. Our Tacoma is not equipped with the upgraded factory JBL audio sound system. And so in your install today, if you do have JBL, it'll differ ever so slightly, and we can make those notes down in the description for you. Alright, so here at the bench, the parts that we're going to need for our install, first and foremost, is the amp and sub that we've chosen to go with by Rockford Fosgate. This happens to be an 8-inch P300-8P, and what's really cool about this enclosure, not only is it preloaded with the sub in the enclosure itself, but the amp is also built in as well. It's an all-in-one unit and allows you to integrate to the factory audio sound system pretty seamlessly. This thing is a ported sturdy subwoofer enclosure, and it's rated for about 300 watts RMS. Now to integrate this amp and sub in our Tacoma, we need a bit of wiring. Wiring kit here calls for an 8-gauge amplifier wiring kit. This is a new concepts kit, which we can link down in the description. Comes with power, ground, RCAs, remote turn-on wire, fuse and fuse holder, and all the accessories needed to install your amp and sub. Now other bits are depending on your install here today. The cool thing is Red Wolf makes this T-harness adapter, which we can modify to allow us to tap into the factory audio sound system without cutting any of the factory wiring. So we're going to show you how we're going to use this harness, which we can also link in the description. Now finally, depending on your subwoofer and amplifier setup, you may or may not need some sort of line-out converter. In most instances, you probably will, and this is the very baseline Pack Audio SNI 35. We also like to use the LP7-2, or you can upgrade and do a nice line-out converter like an Audio Control LC2i, which helps do some signal correction for any sort of bass roll-off from the factory audio sound system. Now alternatively, our loaded enclosure actually has a built-in high-level input, meaning it can take a speaker-level input. We don't need any sort of line-out converter. It can simply take the signal right out of the factory radio and feed it right into our aftermarket amplifier without any sort of line-out converter. So that's the benefit of this. Whether you use this or not, that's up to you. At this point of time, what we need to do is start planning our wire route, and we need to figure out where we want to mount this securely. So let's head back to the truck to make those plans. Alright, so our battery is here on the driver's side front corner, pretty typical for a Tacoma or 4Runner, and essentially you have your power and your ground. If you're adding your amplifier on the passenger rear side corner, you probably want to run it through the grommet found on that side. If you're mounting your amp on the driver's side, there's also a great grommet on this side as well. They're both very similar, where they have little nipples that you can cut off, exposing a nice hole to pass your wire through the factory grommet. We're actually going to go through the passenger side because we're going to mount our amp and sub in the cargo space behind the rear seat on the passenger side. Now fortunately, the amp and sub here, it's a perfect fit. Really, it's not a perfect contour to the enclosure. You can see that top corner kind of sticks out there. But here at the base there's really no more space. That's as thick as the enclosure can be. This does close. It actually does close with a little bit of a push. It's a nice snug fit, but it won't damage the enclosure anyway. And this is probably the biggest box that's a drop-in that you can fit in this location. Now there are other kits where you can replace these cargo pockets there. JL Audio makes their stealth box that fits there, but generally speaking it's around between $700 and $1,000. We've seen various prices on the internet. We can still link it down in the description, and a fiberglass custom enclosure that is fitted perfectly in that location, but you certainly do pay a lot for it. Now, there are other kits, kind of like Taco Tunes. They make a box that fits behind the driver's side passenger back seat, but unfortunately, behind that cargo container, generally 2020 and newer, you're going to have the camera switcher module or some sort of camera relay system behind that pocket, and so you're going to have to relocate that to another location if you do. It makes it kind of a tricky situation. So best case scenario for the easiest install for the best bass without having to tear apart your entire truck, this loaded enclosure fits. It fits well, and it's going to give you plenty of bump for the money. All right, so we're planning our wire run from underneath the hood here. We got to pass our power wire through the firewall. Now, like I said before, there's grommets here, and Toyota has prepared one right here. There's a little nipple that we can cut off, which will expose a nice hole through that grommet into the cabin of the truck. There's one identical on the driver's side as well. So again, depending on where you run your wire, makes it nice and easy to pull that wire through. What we'll do is get a pair of flesh cuts, cut that off, use our notorious hanger to pull that wire through the firewall into the cabin of the truck. Now here's that grommet. We went ahead and cut that off. Really thin rubber, makes it nice and easy. And exposes a really nice hole up underneath the hood. Pass our 8-gauge power wire through. Now this will accommodate a 4-gauge. You could even squeeze a 1 on. But you'll want to lube up that grommet with some soap and water so it makes it nice and slippery, just so it doesn't snag on the rubber as you pull the wire through. All held on with clips. There's 2 clips there and a little plastic wire nut. Pull that off. Now if the clips stay in the body, it's okay. We'll pop them out and reinsert them in the panel when we go to reinstall the panel when we're all done. Now up underneath the hood here, we got our notorious wire hanger. With that hole now cut, we're going to use this just to feed our wire through. It's going to make it a heck of a lot easier. That goes on through. And with this panel all free and popped off, it comes right down there from that grommet. Now what we're going to do is tape our wire to the engine bay side. We'll lube it up with some soap and water and use this to pull and fish our wire into the cabin of the truck. Okay, so we taped our wire. Got it all soaked in water. We lubed both the wire as well as the grommet. Now we're going to go inside and pull it through. So with that wire now pulled through the firewall, we rounded that wire, split loomed it, tied it along the factory wiring using some zip ties here. Went down, up. Now we made a little fuse holder here. Now we used a piece of ABS plastic, bent it, and snagged that bolt just so it's nice and secure there. And it's easy and accessible if we need to get to it. And then we'll have a little short length that'll actually go to this positive post. Got a Provo Beast heat shrink on there, and that's where we're going to connect our wire. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that yet. And when we're making our final connections, we'll go ahead and remove the negative off the battery just so we don't have any electrical shocks when we are finalizing everything. So with that done, keeping the wire still off here, we're all run under the hood. At this point of time, let's transition to inside of the cab itself so we can start running that wire towards the amplifier sub box. With our wire all the way down, fish it up underneath the paddle, put a small hole through that so we can run our power and ground, and we'll cut them to length where they're just for now. But that's really it here. Now we need to set up our ground. Ground, you want to go to the chassis, anything free of paint. Now we do have some bracket bolts that we could probably utilize here, but we'd have to really clean up both the bracket and the mounting location. It also can just put ground with the nut and bolt right to the chassis as long as the paint's all cleaned up, or you can look for a factory ground. That's totally up to you. We're going to show you the technique of using one of these bolts here, using a wire brush and making sure that we have zero resistance on this ground as we prepare to connect that to our amp. We went ahead and pulled this bracket out. It's 2 12mm bolts. So what we're going to do now is take this over to the bench, prepare this bracket for our ground. Now, since we're using the bracket to pass that through, we went ahead and cleaned up both mounting locations there. If your ring terminal can fit underneath that bracket, that's a better case scenario. You can go ahead and utilize that and put it right to that location. In our case, since our wire is a lot smaller than a 4 gauge or 1/0 gauge, what we're going to do at this point is just go on top of the bracket. Hence why we cleaned up the bracket so there's zero paint resistance passing that ground through that bracket itself. All right, so we got the bracket back in. Went ahead and got that all mounted up. Super clean. Test it with the multimeter. We don't have any resistance, so it's a perfect situation there. And at this point, now we can get our package all mounted in there so we can get our power and ground cables hooked up to those terminals. All right, so next for our other cables here, what we did is we grabbed our RCA cables, base knob wire, and a remote turn on wire. We taped it every 6 inches or so. And on our box here, the RCA low-level input simply takes a female end here, and you plug our RCAs right into there. We added some heat shrink just to make sure those don't get pulled apart, and then we passed our other 2 cables through, which will connect into the onboard amplifier. We added a little wire ferrule on our remote end just so it's a nice secure connection. Now, like I said before, there's multiple ways to hook up this Rockford Fosgate Powered sub. It actually takes a high level input, so we don't have to necessarily use a line out converter, but I'm showing this just as an example here. If you're using the high level input, you just cut off these RCA ends and then wire these speaker wires into the speaker wires of the vehicle. Since our amplifier wiring kit came with RCAs and a remote turn on wire and everything, we're showing you how to hook that up here. And we're going to run all these together. This goes all the way down to the other end. We'll run these cables on the driver's side of the vehicle, away from our power wire. Start snaking them through underneath those kick panels, just like we did with our power wire run. Alright, so we got our sub box all in there. Now we'll probably use the included double-sided tape on the bottom, just so it's not shifting back and forth. With the seat in place, it's going to put plenty of pressure on it from the front side, so we don't have to worry about that too much. But went in and got all our connections now made there. Everything's nice and tucked away, cleaned up. All our wiring is done. Everything is going where it should. As for the RCA's base knob cable, as well as our remote turn on wire, we ran it this way. You can kind of see it down in that little crevice there. We put a hole on this side, just like how we've done with the power and ground. And we went up underneath the other side here, up underneath, just tucked it, up out of the way, just like the power wire. We went right down here, tucked it underneath that panel, working our way forward here. Here on the driver's side front door, continued to tuck, pulled out this kick panel just like we did on the passenger side, and that's where our wire comes out here. We need to mount our base knob. We need to connect our RCAs to our line out converter and a remote turn on wire to the factory audio sound system. So let's head back to the bench to show you how we will set up our T-harness and line out converter to make this an easy plug and play. All right, so we're back here at the bench. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our T-harness. But on this generation Tacoma, it has a single plug that has all your speaker wires, and essentially all we have to do is unplug that. We're going to modify this harness, plug in this harness into the factory radio. The original OEM plug will go into this, and now we have this length of wire where we can cut and modify to accommodate our aftermarket amplifier. Now, for example, here's the SNI 35, and nice thing is these are aftermarket color coded, so whites are our front left and grays are front right, and the wires with a black stripe are the negative wires. And all we have to do is connect those in, color for color. We'll just tee into those, solder those in. These black ones are audio grounds in case you have a ground loop or an issue there. That's when you'd hook those up. In most cases, you won't need it as long as your grounds and RCAs are of good quality. So all we have to do is cut and tap into this. We're going to loom all this up and go get this all plugged in. All right, so we got our T-harness ready to go. And again, you can use this with a 5-channel or 4-channel amp because you have access to your rear speakers right there. We soldered in, taped them up. Now we'll relume this whole harness with some high temperature Tessa tape. We're not going to need our brown wires here today. And then once this is all done, we can head back to the car to get it installed. All right, so our T-harness is done. Everything's loomed up here. RCAs will plug right in there. Now, obviously, there's no remote turn-on wire in this line. That would be perfect if there was. If you need a remote turn-on wire, we'll show you where to tap into that. If you don't need one, like our amplifier technically doesn't need one because it can automatically turn on when it senses audio over the factory system. No need to hook it up, but we'll show you anyways in case you're installing a different amplifier at home. All right, so right here in the truck, we need to temporarily pop out the radio so we can install our newly assembled T-harness for signal. Now, it's pretty simple and straightforward. Trim bezel comes off and we'll have some screws holding in the radio itself. You can just simply use your fingers, just like so. Very simple. Love that design. Then you'll have two 10mm bolts on both sides of the radio. Go ahead and pop those on out. All right, so as we pull this on out, you're going to notice there's going to be a black plug here, just like the one that we used in our T-harness. So we'll unplug it, just like that. Go ahead and plug it in its place, just like that. And then we'll plug our T-harness female end into the OEM plug, just like that. Now we have an instant line-out converter. Our wiring currently is down at my feet. We need to fish it up into the dash, so I'm going to quickly do that. And then we'll plug in our RCAs into here, and then we'll show you where the remote turn-on wire or accessory wire on the radio is, so you can tap into that if needed. Plugged our RCAs into our line-out converter. Now lastly, there's a gray plug right next to the black plug. On here, there is a wire that's right underneath the blue wire. That blue wire is constant 12 volt, and there's a gray one directly underneath it. The red T-tap is into that wire there, and that's accessory. And we put a T-tap, and we're gonna put a connector right there. Essentially here, it's gonna snag that accessory turn on, so as soon as the key is turned on, it'll also boot up our amplifier. All right, so we got our T-tap connected there. Let's go ahead and plug that harness right back into the factory radio, just like that. With our RCAs and everything connected, let's tuck them down as well. All right, so we got the positive on there. When we made our connection, obviously the negative was off the battery. Loosened the 12mm nut there on the top, went ahead and attached our power wire, and then reconnected our negative. So that's all in and done and good to go. So at this point, we can go ahead and shut the hood. With the radio now back in and booted up, we went ahead and tested everything, set our gains, crossovers, etc. on our amplifier here. So if you have any questions on what we did here, go ahead and post a comment below. Like I said, I will link all the parts that we used down in the description of the video in case you want to pick them up for yourself. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you liked what you saw, and don't forget to subscribe. I post great content on the channel all the time, and we will see you in the next video.